Floyd Rose FRT-4 has probably the craziest history of any of the Floyd Roses. What the Floyd Rose is, it's essentially the very first ever fine-tuning Floyd Rose model ever created, and it barely existed because it was, as soon as it was made, it was redesigned to the FRT-5, and it was lost off the face of the earth, and nobody even really knows about them. It's pretty crazy, but it's got a really important history in development of tremolo history, actually. So there's a lot to this. I don't even know where to start, but I'm gonna kind of talk about the differences in the models and how this model even came to exist. So basically, long story short, Floyd developed this probably in the winter, so like January, February of 1982. He filed a patent in March 1982, so we know he had it done before then. And it's first seen a prototype, kind of like this one, of Eddie Van Halen in July 1982 on his Frankenstrat. And Floyd Rose was working with, it was probably developed with Floyd Rose and Fernandes as Luthers, and they kind of developed this. And at the 1982 NAMM show in Atlanta, while Kramer Guitars had Eddie Van Halen in contract with the Rockinger tremolo, supposedly Floyd went to go talk to Kramer Guitars and say, hey, I got this done. It's going to be better than the Rockinger, something like that. And they decided to cut out Rockinger and bring in the Floyd Rose into Kramer Guitars' system, and the rest of history. Floyd Rose signed a contract with Kramer Guitars, and they started developing the Floyd Rose system. They cut out Fernandes, even though Floyd Rose was still contracted with them. More on that later. And kind of the rest of is history. It kind of started with this FRT-4. Okay, 1982. So Eddie Van Halen was sick of the non-fine tuners. The problem with the non-fine tuners is that when you clamped them, they'd go slightly sharp or flat, and you have to unclamp it. So if you have the fine tuners, you can just slightly adjust it and it's fine, right? So Floyd Rose was in development these for a long time. For a while, he was trying to figure something out, and it never really worked out. I guess he got in a car accident, so it was a little delayed. But eventually at the 1982 NAMM show, he kind of had it done. This was in June 1982, and in July 1982, Eddie Van Halen's with Kramer Guitars, and he's playing a version of the prototype. Okay. So there's three main versions you got to know about, barely short-lived, and you can basically almost never find these. So the first version is what Eddie Van Halen played. It was similar to this. This one had vertical fine tuners that had imperial measurements. It was in inches. It was fully cast. The base plate and the sustain block didn't join by screws. They joined by silver solder. It's really crazy. More on that later. So this is the one like Eddie Van Halen had. These ones, it's really rare. A second prototype version, this is the one like K.K. Downing played of Judas Priest. This one was made out of milling, and this is all metric, probably made in Japan or Japan parts, something like that is what we believe. And then there was a very short-lived production version by Fernandes Japan in late 1982, early 1983. This one is made of casting, and for about 4 months and pretty hard to find. More on this later. There's also one clone made by Double Eagle, which was a parts company in Japan. And some of them say Double Eagle on here, and some of them do not. And a lot of people mistake them for a real FRT-4, and they are not. They are a clone. They are really cool, though. They are the first ever fine-tuning clone Floyd ever made. So just so you are aware. So if you look at the actual fine-tuning patent filed in March 1982, it's not an FRT-5 original style. It's actually a vertical fine-tuning one. A little fun fact. So what happened was at the 1982 Atlanta NAMM, so Floyd Rose was not contracted with Kramer Guitars. He was still with Fernandes. He was at the Fernandes booth in the 1982 NAMM show. Crazy things happened at this NAMM show. For one, Floyd was at the Fernandes booth, and he seen that and the big news of talk of the town was Eddie Van Halen was with Kramer Guitars. Eddie Van Halen was talked into Kramer Guitars by Dennis Berardi because Dennis Berardi said, hey, we got this Rockinger tremolo. It's going to fix all these fine-tuning issues. And that's what kind of got Eddie to Kramer Guitars initially. Well, ironically, at the 1982 NAMM show, Floyd Rose came there and said, hey, I got this, better fine-tuning system for you. And I guess Eddie Van Halen liked it, and he basically ditched the Rockinger, started playing the Floyd Rose FRT-4 prototype in July 1982. Another fun fact about the 1982 Atlanta NAMM show is that a guy named David Petchlat, who actually claims to make the very first ever fine-tuning tremolo, which is pretty rough, he met up with Eddie in approximately August 1981, and he provided Eddie with a rough version of it, and he showed up. Supposedly he was going to make a deal with Eddie, and he didn't hear back from him. This is the same guy who made the mini Les Paul guitars. David Petchlat showed up at the 1982 NAMM show, the same one where Floyd Rose talked to Kramer and everything's going down with Eddie Van Halen, and he realized that Eddie was with Rockinger and Kramer, and he was quite mad. But he also had a fine-tuning model that he worked on. Crazy. Lots of crazy things happened at the 1982 Atlanta NAMM show. Anyway, back to Eddie Van Halen. So here's it's a gold version. He played it in the Diver Down tour on his Frankenstrat. Okay, here are some pictures of him with it. Right here it is. He played it with the Kramer Pacer Strat head neck. He also had a Boogie Bodies neck. He had it on this Frankenstrat with us for a brief moment at a time. Here's Eddie at the Kramer factory. Here you can see this is not brass. It's actually gold plated. It's cast in gold plated. I didn't know that until someone actually bought a prototype, and it was clear then. And this is the Frankenstrat with FRT-4 this is probably like in October 1982. And by October 82, they already redesigned the FRT-4, and Eddie's playing this FRT-5 prototype on the Kramer ad guitar. So it's very, very short-lived. So in July 1982, Eddie had it. In the fall, like September 82, he was already done with it because they bent it back and made so his hands would not hit it as much. K.K. Downing had a different version. His was made out of, it was milled, not cast. And his is likely of Japanese origin because it's all metric. Again, this is all hazy history. We don't really know who was involved in what, but Fernandes and Floyd Rose, they were working together. So how much did Fernandes have an involvement with this? We will never know. Again, this is secret history here. No one likes talking about it. I'll more on the details on these ones later. Steve Lukather also had a prototype one. I think his was like Eddie Van Halen. Here is Floyd Rose at the 1982 NAMM show. June 1982. Here's Floyd Rose with the Fernandes guitar at the Fernandes booth. And then he must have went to the Kramer Guitars, talked to them, and say, hey, I got a better tremolo than this Rockinger. And then in June 1982, on the Diver Down tour, Eddie is playing, in fact, the prototype gold FRT-4 tremolo. Little fun fact. So this is essentially what Eddie Van Halen had. This is the first one. It's pretty unique. So these are all imperial measurements, so inches. It's all cast. And what's really unique is the sustain block is not bolted through the base plate. It's actually silver soldered on or made as one piece. It's crazy. And then it was chrome plated. And you see the early rendition of the rubber bands here to keep the bolts. If you guys know, the modern Floyd's got finger springs here to hold these up. The reason for that is if you do a huge dive bomb, the saddles would move around too much and loose, and then when you go back pitched, it'd be a little bit out of tune. That's why they use these rubber bands and the finger tuners in modern Floyds. As you can see, it was an issue, so you see the rubber bands here already. Pretty interesting. Here's a front. Eddie's wasn't, his was fully round. As you can see, this one's flat in the front. But yeah, this is basically what Ed's was, just like this. This one's made out of cast, all imperial measurements. Saddle's a little different, okay? Just keep this in mind. The second prototype, this is like K.K. Downing's. This one's a lot different than Eddie's. This one's milled, made out with a mill machine. It wasn't cast. The saddles are thinner in these. These are Japanese saddles. I see these in Japan. The Japanese made these saddles. And the sustain block is bolted down, kind of like the Japanese FRT-3s. It's got the same sustain block as the Japanese FRT-3s. And they're bolted through. It's got 6mm measurements. These are chrome. This is Japanese parts. These are all parts. I believe this is Japanese in origin, or the Japanese made these and sent it to Floyd. That would be my guess. I have these same saddles. I got them directly out of Japan. So this is KK Downing's. So notice on these and also Eddie Van Halen's is the vertical fine tuning goes, here's the base plate, and then it goes straight up, right? That's very important because that's going to be an issue. And that's going to cause the problem is your hands are too close and you hit them. I don't really have a problem with it, but I guess some playing styles will. So keep that in mind because that's going to play an important role in the production one. So here's the Fernandes catalog. Here you see those early style saddles are a little thinner. There's more space in between here, but it's got the embossed logo Floyd Rose. These are the only models I know that have the embossed logo, so they're cast, right? So they're cast, and that's where the Floyd Rose logo came from. So the production FRT-4s are a little different. So the production FRT-4s, they're cast. The saddles are different. They're all metric. These are made. I don't know what factory made these, but the big thing is it's kind of like a mix of both prototypes, I guess. It's cast, but then it has the sustain block of the second prototype. Now what's unique about these ones, so of course you got the embossed Floyd Rose logo. You got the T-blocks still. Saddles are a little different. Now here's see on the prototypes, the tailpiece, the tailpieces stayed on this part of the sustain block and then went up. So it's interesting because the Japanese, they kind of knew like the tailpiece was too close. And actually on these production versions, they actually brought it back a little bit. There's a little more space in between the saddle and the tailpiece. So they kind of knew about that. They kind of said, okay, well, let's bring it back a little bit and then we'll shoot it up. But it was decided later on that, well, why don't we just bend it back so it's completely out of the way? So you got some gold ones. These are really expensive, only seen on the highest end models for a brief moment, and you can't find these. Were never available in the United States. You could only find these on Japanese high quality Fernandes ST guitars. And they had a gold version and as well as a black version. And sometimes the fine tuners were a little different style of fine tuners, but yeah, these are pretty cool. They're really great. You can find them in the catalogs, Japanese catalogs. Here's some examples. Here's the ST135s, the 135s they're on, the chrome, and the FST 155s they're on. Those are gold. Here's some catalogs that show it in Japanese magazines. The pop in the United States had no idea these existed at this time in late 82, 83. They're all with Kramer Guitars, and they had no idea these existed. In fact, most people still don't. You probably didn't even hear about these until now. They had the same locking nuts as the Japanese FRT-3s, same as the Post as well. Floyd Rose also sold these. If you actually, in like late 82 or 83, he actually had some of these stocked. Like Fernandes must have shipped them a bunch of them. And if you were in Seattle, you could probably buy one from him if you went there at the right time. Some videos showing the differences between the double eagles and a bunch of other stuff. So what happened is it gets kind of confusing in Fernandes' history because once this was made, Floyd Rose supposedly did not tell Fernandes that he was with Schaller and Kramer, and they're like, what the hell is going on? But he must have still had a contract with Fernandes until 85. And so Fernandes still made official Floyd Rose units. What they did is they redeveloped it and had their own FRT-5 version. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. But they must have found out. I don't know exactly the time frame with the FRT-4s and 5s in Japan. It's really hazy. I got theories, but I don't want to get them into too deep because I got to wait till there's more information coming out. But basically, they were short-lived, and And by the time they revised it to the FRT-5, so supposedly they did that. They revised it. By then they had their reproducing them, but then Floyd Rose was in Kramer Guitars, and he kind of was like done with Fernandes. But Fernandes was still making FRT-5s and kind of competing with the Schaller made ones. That's the next video.